The morning my daughter-in-law called to suggest I voluntarily relocate from the home Raymond and I built in 1987, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my accounting notebook open in my lap. Not because I saw it coming, but because I am Claudia May Washington. And since I was 9 years old, sitting beside my mother, learning how to keep a ledger, I have never started a day without knowing exactly how much money I have, where it is, and what it is doing. Brittany spoke with the kind of gentleness that is almost indistinguishable from sweetness, the kind that takes practice. Claudia, she said, we need to have a real conversation about your future. Now that Raymond is gone, that house is simply too much for one person to manage. Darius and I have been thinking. There are some wonderful communities for women your age. Peaceful, structured. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. A wonderful community for women my age. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard where Raymond had planted a blueberry bush the previous spring and promised he'd build me a rose trellis before summer. He died of a heart attack 11 days before that phone call. 11 days. The soil where he'd been planning to dig the trellis posts was still soft. Brittany kept talking. She mentioned maintenance costs, property taxes, the loneliness of a large house with only one person rattling around inside it. Every sentence was wrapped carefully like a gift box with a bow, pretty on the outside and something you didn't ask for on the inside. Then she said the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. Darius reviewed the trust documents. According to what he found, you actually only have a right of occupancy under the trust provisions. We all know Raymond wanted the assets preserved for the next generation. A right of occupancy. I, Claudia Washington, who taught elementary school for 31 years, who wrote a check every single month to pay down that mortgage, who painted every room in that house with my own 2 hands, who sat in the emergency room at 2 a.m. when Raymond's chest started tightening before we knew what it was being told by my daughter-in-law, an attorney, that I was a guest in my own home. I let the silence stretch, long enough for Brittany to start filling it with more language about legal rights and asset management and what Raymond would have wanted. Then I said very quietly, "Brittany, thank you for calling. Let me think about it." I hung up. I took one slow sip of coffee, and I opened my notebook to a fresh page. What Brittany did not know, what perhaps no one in the Washington family truly understood, was that Raymond had spoken to me about this possibility 3 years before he died. Not because he knew when he would go, but because Raymond Harold Washington, a man who had spent 40 years reading soil conditions before laying a single foundation, had felt the ground shifting beneath his family long before anyone else noticed the cracks. He had already built me something to stand on. This is the story of how I found it, and what I did with it. Not to punish anyone, but to correct something that was wrong in the only way it deserved to be corrected. I was born Claudia May Banks in Atlanta, Georgia in 1961, the third of 6 children. My father, Ernest Banks, was a plumber. Honest work, steady hands, never missed a day unless he was sick, and sometimes not even then. My mother, Dorothy Banks, was something harder to name. She wasn't a bookkeeper by profession. She was a homemaker in the way that word used to mean something. She made the home function, which is a different skill entirely from decorating it. What my mother did specifically was keep the books for half our neighborhood. Women who couldn't read, women whose husbands managed all the money and didn't explain anything, women who were one missed paycheck away from a crisis they couldn't see coming. They would come to our kitchen table and sit with my mother, and she would go through their numbers with them. How much came in? How much went out? What could be cut? What absolutely could not? She had a handwriting so neat it looked typeset, and she moved through a ledger the way some people move through scripture. With reverence, and with the understanding that the truth on those pages mattered. Money is not a man's subject or a woman's subject, she used to say, pressing the tip of her pen to a column of figures without looking up. Money is a subject for people with good sense. You are going to have good sense, Claudia. I started learning beside her at 9 years old. By the time I was 12, I could reconcile a household ledger faster than she could. At 19, I enrolled in a basic accounting course at the local community college. Paid for it myself by working weekends at a laundromat 2 bus stops from home. Not because I wanted to be an accountant, but because my mother's voice lived inside me and I had taken her meaning seriously. A woman who understands her own finances is a woman no one can make helpless. That is the kind of woman I was when I met Raymond Washington. I met him in the fall of 1979 at a church social I attended only because my younger sister Loretta refused to go alone and had a gift for making refusal feel more exhausting than agreement. Raymond was 27. He had started a small construction company the year before with his best friend Terrence Boyd. 2 men, a truck, and enough ambition to outwork the doubt. He was not movie handsome. He was the kind of man whose face you had to look at more than once before you understood it. Broad forehead, serious eyes, hands that were permanently rough no matter how recently he'd washed them. The hands of someone who built things and didn't apologize for it. What I noticed first, before anything else, was that he was listening to someone talk. Really listening in the way that had become rare enough to be remarkable. An older man was explaining something about a job site, and Raymond was nodding with his whole body, not the polite half-nod of a man waiting for his turn to speak. I thought that is a man who pays attention. We talked for 2 hours that night. He walked me to Loretta's car and asked if he could call me. I said yes. He called the next morning, which was either bold or impatient, and I decided to think of it as bold. We married in the summer of 1981. In 1984, our son Darius was born, our only child, though not for lack of wanting. There was a loss the year before that we did not speak of, often a grief that lived quietly in the space between us for a long time before it softened into something we could carry instead of something that carried us. Darius came into the world 7 weeks early and spent his first month in the NICU. And Raymond sat in that hospital with me every single night, sleeping in a chair that was not built for sleeping, eating whatever I told him to eat, not once suggesting there was somewhere else he needed to be. In 1987, we bought the house in Decatur. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a front porch that got afternoon shade in summer. We paid $94,000 for it, which required every dollar we had saved, and a mortgage payment that was for the first several years genuinely frightening. Raymond promised he would build me a porch swing when the finances loosened up. He installed it in 1991. It is still there. I looked at it this morning. Let me be clear about something because it matters to everything that follows. I taught elementary school for 31 years. 3rd grade mostly, with a few years in 2nd. I retired in 2015 with a teacher's pension of $2,340 a month. Not lavish, but solid and dependable, which is the best thing a pension can be. Raymond built Washington and Boyd Construction from 2 men and a truck into a mid-size firm specializing in residential and commercial work across the greater Atlanta area. By 2010, the company was generating roughly $1.8 million in annual revenue. We were not wealthy in the way that word tends to conjure images. We were something I consider more durable, stable. No debt we didn't understand. No spending that outpaced our earning. No financial decision made without both of us knowing exactly what it was and why. Every single month for the length of our marriage. Raymond and I sat down together for what we called our 30-minute meeting. Kitchen table after dinner coffee going cold because we kept forgetting to drink it. We looked at what had come in, what had gone out, what we were saving toward, and at what pace. It was not romantic. It was not exciting. It was the single most important habit of our marriage, and I say that knowing we had many good habits. Once a year we met with Harold Simmons, the attorney who handled Raymond's business affairs, to review our estate documents. Wills, beneficiary designations, property titles. I sat in every one of those meetings. I read every document placed in front of me before I signed it. Raymond would not have wanted it any other way, and neither would I. This is the detail Brittany had calculated incorrectly. She had looked at me, a 63-year-old retired school teacher, gray-haired, soft-spoken someone who brought sweet potato pie to every family gathering and called everyone baby when she meant it. And she had seen a woman who did not understand her own finances. She was looking at the wrong woman entirely. Darius grew up loved. I want to say that plainly because it is true, and because what came later could make it sound otherwise. He was a bright, gentle boy who made friends easily and trusted people perhaps a little too readily. Raymond and I were not perfect parents. No one is. But our particular failure, if I had to name it, was that we gave him a life without enough friction. We had both grown up navigating real hardship, and we overcorrected. We smoothed too many things over. We solved too many problems before he had the chance to develop the muscle for solving them himself. He was 38 years old when Raymond died. Successful by most measures. A good job, a nice apartment before the marriage, a warm manner that people responded to. But there was still underneath all of it a certain quality I can only describe as unfinished. A place where the backbone should have been, that was still soft. He met Brittany Holloway at a legal conference in Atlanta in 2010. She had graduated from Emory Law School with a concentration in real estate and trust law. She was sharp polished and had the kind of confidence that fills a room efficiently without waste. I remember the first dinner we had together, the four of us at our kitchen table in Decatur. Brittany was pleasant in the way that a very intelligent person is pleasant when they are also assessing. She asked about the neighborhood, about the house, about how long we had lived there. The questions were friendly, but the eyes behind the questions were calculating square footage. After Darius and Brittany left that night, I sat with Raymond at the kitchen table while he finished his coffee. "Raymond," I said, "do you mind if I say something honest?" "You never ask permission for that," he said. "Brittany looks at this house the way a real estate agent looks at a listing." He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet Raymond went into when he was thinking something through rather than just reacting to it. "I noticed that too," he said. "Darius didn't." "No," he said. "He didn't. We didn't say anything more about it that night. We didn't need to." Raymond was already doing what Raymond always did when he sensed unstable ground. He was thinking about the foundation. In the 5 years before Raymond died, Brittany began asking different kinds of questions at family dinners. She asked about Raymond's retirement plans, whether the house was fully paid off, how the business was structured, what our investment situation looked like. The questions were always casual, always embedded in conversation, never blunt enough to call out directly. But they were consistent, persistent. And they always circled back to the same gravitational center. What happens to all of this when Raymond is gone? Raymond answered everything pleasantly and revealed nothing. He had a gift for that, speaking at length while saying very little of substance. It was one of the things that made him a good businessman and an occasionally maddening husband. What I did not know until much later was that he had been writing those questions down. Every single one of them in a small blue notebook he kept in the locked bottom drawer of his study desk. The date, the context, the exact wording of what Brittany had asked, and his response. 47 entries over 5 years. 3 months before he died, Raymond called me into his study after dinner. He closed the door behind us, something he almost never did. He sat down across from me and placed a brown envelope on the desk between us. "Claudia," he said, "if I go before you do." "Raymond, let me say it. I've spoken with Harold. Everything is arranged. You will not be left without. But you need to know what you have. Not hear it from someone else, not have it explained to you after the fact. You need to know it for yourself." He pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a handwritten list. Account numbers, phone contacts, passwords, the names of people he trusted, and exactly why he trusted each of them. Paper-clipped to the front was a single index card in Raymond's handwriting. "Do not sign anything for 60 days. See Harold first. See Dot Freeman first. Then decide." I did not ask as many questions as I should have right then. I was looking at my husband across a desk at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, and something in his face made the questions feel less urgent than the moment itself. I took the envelope. I told him I understood. I promised. 3 months later, Raymond died of a heart attack at 6 in the morning. He was standing in our kitchen making coffee. The paramedic said he likely felt very little, that it was fast. I have chosen to believe that. It is the most useful thing I can do with it. The blueberry bush in the backyard is leafing out now the way it does every spring. The rose trellis is still unbuilt. But Raymond left me something better than a trellis. He left me a map, and 11 days after we buried him, my daughter-in-law called to tell me I was a guest in my own house. She had no idea I had already started reading it. Raymond Washington's funeral was held on a Saturday morning at First Ebenezer Baptist Church, where we had been members for 26 years. The sanctuary was full. I had expected people. Raymond knew everyone, and everyone who knew him liked him. But I had not expected this many. Colleagues from the construction industry, clients going back 15 years, neighbors from our street in Decatur, parents of children I had taught in 3rd grade who had heard through the church grapevine and come anyway. People were standing along the back wall and out into the corridor. Pastor Ellington spoke for 20 minutes. He talked about Raymond as a builder, not just of structures, but of things that held. He said Raymond Washington understood that the most important work is the work nobody sees. The foundation, the frame, the things underneath that make everything above ground possible. I stood straight through the entire service. I wore black, my hair pinned up the way Raymond liked it, a white handkerchief folded in my left hand that I did not use. Not because I was not grieving. I was grieving in a way that felt geological. Deep and slow and massive, the kind of grief that does not express itself in tears so much as in the changed weight of every ordinary moment. But I was also aware in some precise and watchful part of myself that I was being observed, and I was not ready to be seen as diminished. Brittany sat to Darius's left throughout the service. At some point during Pastor Ellington's remarks, I noticed her looking at her phone. Not the way people check messages, a quick glance and away. She was looking at it with the focused attention of someone waiting for a specific piece of information to arrive. I filed that away. I file most things away. It is a habit my mother built in me at the kitchen table, and it has rarely failed me. The call came on a Tuesday morning 11 days after we buried Raymond. Brittany did not come to the house. I have thought about that choice since, and I believe it was deliberate. A phone call can be ended. A conversation held in someone's kitchen, in the kitchen of the woman you are asking to leave, is harder to walk away from without the weight of what you are doing becoming visible in your body. Claudia, she said, I think it's time we had a real practical conversation about your situation. She had prepared this. I could hear the structure of it. The way each point connected to the next, the way the language was chosen to sound like concern rather than pressure. She talked about the size of the house, about maintenance and property taxes, and the particular vulnerability of an older woman living alone in a large home. She mentioned senior communities in the suburbs. She had even done some research, she said, and there were some very nice ones. I let her talk. Then she said Darius reviewed the trust paperwork. According to what he found, you actually only have a right of occupancy under the trust provisions. The assets are structured to pass to the next generation. We want to make sure you're taken care of, but we also need to be realistic about what you're actually entitled to. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment. Through the kitchen window, I could see the blueberry bush Raymond had planted. The leaves were coming in. Brittany, I said, and I kept my voice very even. You just told me I have a right of occupancy in my own home. That's what the documents suggest. You specialize in real estate and trust law. You know the difference between a right of occupancy and joint ownership. A pause, longer than the one before it. That's why we want to get clarity on this early before... Thank you for calling, I said. Let me think about it. I hung up, refilled my coffee, sat back down at the kitchen table and opened my notebook to a clean page. I wrote day 11. Brittany called. Right of occupancy. She has read something, or she is guessing. Either way, she is moving. See Harold today. Harold Simmons has had his office in Buckhead since 1985. He is a small, precise man. Gold-rimmed glasses, brown suit, the kind of person you would walk past in a grocery store without a second look and spend the rest of your life being grateful you hired. Raymond had worked with him for over 2 decades. I sat across from his desk and told him what Brittany had said. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses, cleaned them with the small cloth he kept in his breast pocket, and put them back on. Who told her that he said? Her husband. My son. Harold turned to his computer and typed for a moment. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the keys. Claudia, he said without looking up. I don't know what documents Darius reviewed, but I need to tell you something clearly. You do not have a right of occupancy. You are a co-owner of that house. Your name and Raymond's have been on the deed together since 1987. That has never changed. I absorbed this slowly. And the trust Brittany mentioned. There is a trust. Raymond established it in 2019. He looked up then. You are the primary beneficiary. Darius inherits only after you pass or if you voluntarily relinquish your interest. She didn't know that. It appears not. Harold paused. Or she knew and gambled that you didn't. I thought about both possibilities and decided it did not matter which was true. The effect was the same either way. My daughter-in-law, an attorney who specialized in exactly this area of law, had called me 11 days after my husband's funeral and told me I was a guest in my own home. Whether she was wrong or lying, I was not going to sit quietly and let it stand. Harold, I said, I need to know everything Raymond left. Not a summary. Everything. He looked at me for a moment. The look of a man deciding how much someone is ready to hear. Raymond gave me instructions, he said. He told me that when he was gone I should tell you this. Claudia, don't open the box in the study cabinet until you've sat with Harold and Dot. What box, he didn't say. He said you would know the cabinet. That evening I stood in the doorway of Raymond's study for the first time since he died. I had avoided this room. The rest of the house I had managed. The kitchen, the bedroom, even his side of the closet, which I had stood in front of one morning and simply breathed for a while before closing the door again. But the study was different. The study was where Raymond went to think, and it still held the particular quality of his concentration, the way a room holds warmth after a fire has gone out. The oak cabinet stood against the far wall, a piece he had salvaged from a renovation job years ago because he said good wood should not be thrown away. I knew exactly which cabinet he meant. The bottom drawer had a small brass lock. The key hung on a hook inside the cabinet above it. I had known it was there for 30 years and had never used it. I unlocked the drawer. Inside was a blue tin box, the kind that originally held Danish butter cookies, the kind every grandmother in America has used at some point to store something that has nothing to do with cookies. I lifted the lid. 3 things inside. The first was a small blue notebook. On the cover in Raymond's handwriting, questions, BHW. Those were Brittany's initials before the marriage. Brittany Holloway, then Washington. I opened it. 47 entries. Dates going back 5 years. Each one recorded a question Brittany had asked at a family gathering or dinner. The date, the setting, the exact words, and Raymond's response. Every question circled the same territory: the house, the business, the retirement accounts, what our plans were, what would happen when Raymond was gone. Reading through them felt like watching someone slowly, patiently, quietly taking measurements of a building they intended to acquire. The second item was a folder. Inside were 3 loan agreements. Formal documents on company letterhead signed by both Raymond and Darius, witnessed and notarized. Loans from Washington and Boyd Construction to Darius Washington personally. The amounts varied. Attached to the front of the folder was a single sheet in Raymond's hand. Total outstanding. Company loans to DW $112,400 principal plus interest as of December 2022. No payments made. I read that twice. $112,400. My son had borrowed that amount from his father's company across 3 separate agreements with formal repayment schedules that had never been honored, and Raymond had said nothing to me. Not one word. The third item was a small black USB drive. A strip of white tape on the side written in black marker. Dot knows how to read this. I set the 3 items on Raymond's desk and sat down in his chair. The leather was worn in the shape of him. He had built all of this in silence. While he was still alive, while we were still eating dinner together and watching the news and arguing mildly about whether the kitchen needed repainting, he had been quietly, methodically constructing a record, documenting every question, formalizing every loan, preparing every piece of evidence I might one day need. I sat in his chair in the dark study, and for the first time since he died, I cried. Not from grief, exactly, or not only from grief. I cried because I understood in that moment the full scale of what he had done. Not just the practical work of it, but the love embedded in it. The particular love of a man who shows you he has been paying attention, and has been paying attention for years, and never made you feel the weight of what he was carrying. I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, put the lid back on the tin box, and carried everything to the kitchen table. I had work to do. Dorothy Freeman has her accounting office on Auburn Avenue in Sweet Auburn, the historic neighborhood east of downtown Atlanta, where Martin Luther King Jr. was born, and where much of the black business and civic life of the city was rooted for a century. The office is small and so orderly it almost hums. Dot is 60 years old, with silver and black hair cut close to her head, and the kind of directness that some people find uncomfortable, and I have always found restful. She was expecting me. I had called ahead, and she had simply said, "I know why you're calling. Come Thursday morning." When I sat down across from her desk, I placed the USB drive between us. She picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and set it back down. "Raymond sent me a backup copy of this 6 months before he died," she said. I stared at her. "He said, Dot, if Claudia ever comes to you with that drive, it means I went first. Walk her through all of it." So, she folded her hands on the desk. "Let me walk you through all of it." What Dot told me over the next 2 hours rearranged everything I thought I understood about my own life. Washington and Boyd Construction was not the modest operation most people assumed it was. In 2015, Raymond and Terrence Boyd had restructured the company completely, separating personal and business assets and placing 60% of the company's equity into a separate trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust, Claudia May Washington. The company had been generating average annual revenue of $2.1 million over the past 5 years. Net profit after expenses and taxes approximately $380,000 per year. A portion of those profits had been flowing on a regular schedule into the trust account in my name. Why didn't he tell me, I asked? My voice came out quieter than I intended. Dot was quiet for a moment before she answered. Because he was concerned that if Darius knew the actual scale of the assets, there would be pressure from inside the family. He wanted you to have time to understand what you had before anyone else had the opportunity to interfere. The 60 days, I said. That's why he said not to sign anything for 60 days. Yes. During that window, no one can compel you to make decisions about the trust without Harold's involvement. It was a buffer he built in deliberately. She opened a bound document and slid it across the desk. The numbers on that first page are something I will remember for the rest of my life. Joint checking and savings accounts, $287,000. Business trust. 60% equity in Washington and Boyd Construction, valued at approximately $1.4 million. The Decatur house, jointly titled, appraised at $520,000. And then a fourth line that stopped my breath entirely. Commercial land parcel, 2.3 acres, Gwinnett County, Georgia. Titled Claudia May Washington. Current appraisal $890,000. The Gwinnett property, I said. Raymond purchased it in 2018. He told you it was a small company investment. Dot's voice was careful. Technically, the company funded the purchase, but the deed was placed in your name personally. Why? She looked at me steadily. Because he told me if everything falls apart, the company, the family, anything, Claudia needs something that is only hers, something no one can reach. That land is what he bought you, not the family, you. I looked at the total at the bottom of the page. Approximately $3.1 million. Brittany had called me 11 days after Raymond's funeral to tell me I had a right of occupancy in my own home. While I was sitting in this office looking at a document that placed $3.1 million in assets under my control, most of which she did not know existed, and none of which she could touch without my agreement. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I called Loretta. I sat in my car outside Dot's office for 20 minutes before I turned the key. The afternoon was warm, the kind of Atlanta afternoon that gets into your bones. I called my sister. Loretta, I said when she picked up, I need you to listen. I'm listening. I told her everything. The phone call from Brittany, Harold's office, the blue tin box in Raymond's study, everything Dot had just shown me. Loretta is the kind of person who listens without filling silences, which is rarer than it sounds and more valuable than most people realize. She let me finish completely before she spoke. "What do you want to do?" she said. "I want to correct something that is wrong," I said. Legally. Carefully. The way Raymond would have done it. Document everything, act at the right moment, and don't let emotion move faster than strategy. Then you need a plan. I have the beginning of one. Help me think through the rest. Over the following days, working quietly across 3 separate offices and 1 church, I built the architecture of what came next. I did not respond to Brittany's proposal. I did not decline, and I did not agree. When she called, and she did call with increasing frequency as the days passed, I said very pleasantly that I was still thinking things through and would be in touch soon. When she and Darius came by the house, I cooked dinner and poured sweet tea and listened politely to everything that was said. I noticed that Brittany's visits grew more frequent as the weeks went on. The gap between calls grew shorter. She was not a patient woman when she was waiting for something she believed was already hers. That impatience was useful to me. Harold spent 2 weeks reviewing every document in Raymond's estate, the trust instruments, the deeds, the business agreements, the loan contracts. His conclusion was unambiguous. Everything Raymond had arranged was legally sound, properly witnessed and notarized, and gave me full authority over every significant asset in the estate. There were no errors, no vulnerabilities, no gaps Brittany could exploit. Raymond had been meticulous in a way that spoke of a man who had thought about this for a long time. Harold and I met every Tuesday and Thursday, always scheduled during hours when I would plausibly be at the grocery store or visiting a friend. Loretta drove me to several of those meetings so my car would not be seen near Harold's building. It may sound like excessive caution. It was not. Terrence Boyd had been Raymond's partner for 30 years and his closest friend for longer than that. He is 65, completely white-haired now, with the deliberate manner of a man who has learned that speaking slowly is not the same as thinking slowly. We met at a small diner near Decatur, far from the office, far from anywhere Darius and Brittany were likely to appear. I ordered coffee. He ordered pie and barely touched it. Raymond talked to me about Brittany, he said before I had asked anything, starting around 2018. He wasn't angry about it. He was just watchful. He said she looked at assets the way a good contractor looks at a building that's going up for sale, not as a home, as an opportunity. Did anything specific happen? In 2019, Darius came to me. Terrence paused, pressing his fork into the untouched pie. Not to Raymond, to me. He asked about the possibility of buying out Raymond's share of the company. Said it would simplify things for the family. He had the language of it all worked out. Terms, valuation methods, transition timeline. Darius didn't come up with that language on his own. Darius is a smart young man, but he had never used words like that in his life before he married Brittany. I told Raymond that afternoon. He looked up at me. That's when Raymond restructured the trust. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced 2 envelopes. He placed them on the table between us. He left these with me. Said if you ever came looking, I should give them to you. The first envelope held a copy of an email chain, printed out dated 2021, between Brittany and a law firm in Midtown Atlanta specializing in trust litigation. The inquiry was framed as hypothetical the way attorneys do when they want plausible distance from the question. It asked about the viability of challenging a trust established by an elderly grantor on grounds of diminished cognitive capacity or undue influence. Raymond had obtained this somehow. I did not ask Terrence how, and he did not offer. What mattered was that he had it, and that it was dated more than a year before he died, which meant Brittany had been preparing the legal architecture of a challenge while Raymond was still alive. She had been planning this before she even needed to. Terrence placed the second envelope on top of the first. This one was thicker, sealed with brown packing tape. He said to give you this one separately. He said... Terrence stopped, took a breath. He was not a man who showed emotion easily, and what I saw across his face in that moment was something genuine and controlled. He said, give it to her when she's ready to finish it. Not before. I opened the envelope at the diner table. Inside was a small voice recorder, the kind used for dictation older model with a fresh battery. Taped to the back was a slip of paper in Raymond's handwriting. Living room, Sunday, March 14th, 2021. After Claudia left for church. I looked at Terrence. I never listened to it, he said. Raymond was clear that it was not mine to hear. I knew exactly which Sunday he meant. I knew it immediately the way you know certain dates that have attached themselves to something larger. March 14th, 2021 was the first Sunday after Raymond began his cardiac treatment. A fact I had kept from most people, because Raymond did not want to become the subject of worry or pity before he had to. I had gone to church alone that morning and stayed afterward to speak with Pastor Ellington because I needed to sit somewhere that felt steady. Darius and Brittany had come by the house while I was gone. They called it a check-in visit. Darius said they just wanted to make sure Raymond had everything he needed. That evening, alone in Raymond's study, I put on my headphones and pressed play. 52 minutes of audio. The voices were clear. They had been sitting in the living room, close to the bookshelf near the television where Raymond had apparently placed the recorder sometime before I left that morning. It was not melodramatic. That was the thing that made it so difficult to listen to. There was no shouting, no villain speech, no moment that felt like a movie. It was 2 people speaking in ordinary voices about a practical plan the way you might discuss renovating a kitchen or planning a vacation. Brittany's voice steady and methodical. We don't need to do anything now. We wait. When Raymond goes, and the doctors are saying his heart is not in good shape, so it won't be long. We approach Claudia carefully, concerned, loving. We talk about how the house is too big for one person, how she deserves to be somewhere easier to manage. We give her time to feel like it's her decision. And if she doesn't go willingly, then we look at the trust documents. There's enough ambiguity in how a layperson might read them that she might not even realize what she actually owns. We start with that. And if she does realize, a pause. Then we file a challenge. Undue influence. Diminished capacity. She's 63, she taught 3rd grade. She's never managed a significant financial portfolio in her life. We make the case that Raymond was influenced by an unreasonable attachment to a spouse over his own son and grandchildren. A pause. Courts have accepted less. Then Darius's voice quieter. Mom won't understand any of this. And Brittany, she doesn't need to understand it. She just needs to sign. I pressed stop. I sat in Raymond's chair in the dark, my hands flat on his desk for a long time. He had sat in this same chair on a Sunday afternoon in March 2021, and he had listened to his son's wife lay out a plan to remove me from my own home after he was gone. He had not confronted them. He had not called me. He had pressed record, waited until the recording was finished, sealed it in an envelope, and given it to Terrence to hold. Because he understood something. I was only now beginning to fully understand. The right response to that conversation was not anger, it was preparation. Thank you, I thought, sitting in the dark in his chair. You trusted me to handle it when the time came. You didn't try to handle it for me. The next morning I called Harold. I have everything we need, I said. Over the following 2 weeks, Harold and I completed the architecture. Every document was formally organized. The trust instruments, the deed records, the loan agreements, the blue notebook, the email printout, the recording. Everything was notarized, copied, and stored in 3 separate locations: Harold's office, Dot's office, and a fireproof lockbox at First Ebenezer Baptist Church, held by Pastor Ellington. When Harold asked why the church, I told him the truth, because it is the one place in this situation where I am absolutely certain Brittany has never thought to look. Harold also walked me through the risk I needed to prepare for. An undue influence challenge. The argument that Claudia had manipulated an aging man into structuring his estate in her favor was the most likely legal avenue Brittany would pursue. It was a legitimate strategy in trust law, and Brittany knew exactly how to construct one. What she did not know was what we had to counter it: 23 documented meetings between Raymond and Harold over 5 years each, with detailed notes. A psychological evaluation Raymond had commissioned independently in 2020, confirming full cognitive capacity. 47 entries in the blue notebook, each one demonstrating a man with precise memory, deliberate intention, and very specific reasons for every decision he had made. And 52 minutes of audio in which Brittany herself had explained in her own voice exactly why she had believed none of this was coming. By the end of week 6, I was ready. Brittany did not know that yet, but she was about to find out. On the 35th day after Raymond's funeral, Brittany came to the house without calling first. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making a grocery list when I heard the car in the driveway, then the sound of heels on the front steps. Quick, purposeful, not the pace of someone dropping by for a visit. I set down my pen before I answered the door. She was dressed the way she always was, sharp blazer, everything fitted, hair perfectly in order. But there was something different in her face that afternoon, a tightness around the eyes that I recognized as controlled impatience. I had seen it in parents at school conferences, the ones who had already decided what they wanted and were running out of tolerance for the process of getting there. "Claudia," she said, stepping past me into the foyer, "I think we've reached the point where we really need a decision. I can't keep things in limbo like this. Would you like some coffee?" I said. "I don't need coffee. I need to know your timeline." I led her into the kitchen anyway and put the kettle on because it gave me something to do with my hands, and because the ordinary rhythms of hospitality have a way of shifting the temperature of a difficult conversation. Brittany remained standing. "I've had some calls from a couple of the senior communities," she said. "There's one in Alpharetta that has availability right now, and they won't hold a unit indefinitely. If you're seriously considering..." "Brittany," I said, "how long have I been saying I'm thinking about it?" A pause. 35 days. "And how long did Raymond and I live in this house together?" She pressed her lips together. "That's not..." 42 years. 35 days is not a long time to think about 42 years. She looked at me then with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not the polished calculation I was accustomed to, but something underneath it. Something that looked, if I am honest, like the beginning of worry. Darius is going to come talk to you, she said after a moment. Next week. I'd love to see him, I said and meant it completely. After she left, I called Harold. She came to the house, I said. In person, no notice. She's accelerating. How did she seem? Impatient. And impatient people make mistakes. Are you ready to move to the next stage? Not quite. I want to see Darius first. Let's say the following Monday for the meeting. I'll prepare accordingly. Thank you, Harold. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window. Outside the blueberry bush Raymond had planted was full and green and heavy with fruit that was just beginning to ripen. First harvest coming. He had known he might not be here to see it. He had planted it anyway. That was Raymond all over. He came on a Wednesday evening alone. No Brittany. He texted ahead of time. Mom, can I come by tonight? Just me. And I replied that I would have dinner ready at 7. I made his favorite baked chicken collard greens cornbread from the cast-iron skillet Raymond's mother had given us as a wedding gift. I set the table in the kitchen, not the dining room, because the dining room is for company, and Darius is not company. He arrived at 7:05, looking like a man who had spent the drive over rehearsing what he was going to say, and had arrived uncertain whether any of it was right. He is 38 years old, my son. He has Raymond's jawline and my coloring, and a quality that belongs only to himself, a warmth that comes naturally that has always drawn people to him, that I watched Brittany systematically redirect over the years of their marriage, until it was pointing only where she wanted it pointed. We ate first. I have always believed that difficult conversations go better on a full stomach. We talked about small things. His job, a movie he had seen, whether I had called the furnace company yet about the annual service. He ate 2 portions of the collard greens without being asked which is the highest compliment a person can pay them. After dinner, I cleared the plates and refilled his glass of water, and then I sat back down and folded my hands on the table, which is the signal in our family that what comes next is not small talk. He knew it immediately. He set down his glass. Mom, he said. Baby, I said. He looked at his hands. You haven't been calling Brittany back. I return every call Brittany makes to me. I simply haven't agreed to what she's proposing. She's worried about you. We both are. The house is... Darius. I waited until he looked at me. I want to ask you one honest question, and I want you to answer it honestly. Not the answer Brittany helped you prepare. Your answer. He held my gaze. After a moment, he nodded. Do you want me to leave this house because you are genuinely worried about me? Or do you want me to leave because you believe I have no real claim here now that your father is gone? The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove, the one with the sunflower on the face that Raymond bought at a craft fair in 1999, and that I have never replaced because I cannot bring myself to tick through 10 seconds. 20. Darius's eyes went red. He did not speak immediately. He opened his mouth once and closed it again. He looked out the window at the dark backyard, then back at me, and I watched something move across his face. Something complicated and effortful, like a man trying to lift something he has been pretending is not there. Mom, he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word. I don't think that. Then what do you think? Another long pause. I think I've been letting someone tell me what to think for a long time. And I don't know exactly when that started, but I know it's true. I stood up. I went to the cabinet beside the refrigerator where I keep the things that do not have another place. Old birthday cards, a spare set of keys, the small wooden box of buttons I've been meaning to sort for 15 years. Behind all of that is a shoebox, and inside the shoebox is a collection of photographs I have been keeping since before Darius was born. I found the one I was looking for and brought it back to the table. It was a photograph taken in March of 1987, the day we signed the papers on the house. Raymond and I standing in front of the front door, each holding one end of the key because neither of us wanted to be the only one holding it. That had been Raymond's idea, and I had laughed, and whoever took the photograph caught us in the middle of laughing. We looked young. We looked like people who believed in the thing they were building. On the back, in Raymond's handwriting, "Our house, March 15th, 1987. I set it on the table in front of Darius and let him look at it. Your father loved you, Darius. He loved you all his life from the night you came into the world 7 weeks early, and he sat in that hospital and refused to leave. That love was real, and it was complete, and it never had conditions on it." Darius was staring at the photograph. He also loved me. Completely. Not instead of you. Alongside you. Those two things don't cancel each other out. They never did. He picked up the photograph carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to a time you cannot return to. "I know you feel pulled in a direction right now," I said. "I know the situation you're in is more complicated than it looks from the outside. But I need you to understand something that I will not say again. This is my home. Not because of what is written on any document. Because I have been here in every ordinary and extraordinary way a person can be somewhere for 42 years. I helped build what this house became, and I am not leaving it." He set the photograph down. His jaw was tight in the way Raymond's used to get when he was holding something together by effort. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I'm sorry for what's been said and what's been done. I'm sorry I didn't—" He stopped, started again. "I should have come to you sooner. I know I said. I don't know how to fix it. I know that too. But I'll tell you what my mother used to say." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "An apology is what you say. Making it right is what you do afterward. One doesn't substitute for the other." He nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they are absorbing something rather than simply hearing it. "Can I—" he started. "Can I still come to dinner on Sundays?" I looked at my son, this 38-year-old man who had just asked permission to come home for Sunday dinner in the voice of the boy who used to come looking for me in the kitchen when something frightened him at night. "You can always come to Sunday dinner," I said. "You never needed to ask for that." He left around 9 o'clock. I washed the dishes and wiped down the stove and sat at the kitchen table for a while afterward, not doing anything in particular. Just sitting. I thought about the recording, about Brittany's voice saying she just needs to sign with the calm efficiency of someone discussing a transaction. And I thought about Darius sitting across from me 20 minutes ago, his eyes red, asking if he could come home for Sunday dinner. He was not a villain. He was a man who had walked into something he couldn't see and stayed too long to know how to walk back out. The door I was about to open was going to change that whether he was ready or not. I called Harold at 9:30. "It's time," I said. Set the meeting for Monday. 3 days after Darius's visit, Harold called me at 8 in the morning. "Brittany contacted the office yesterday," he said. "She knows you've been coming here." I set down my coffee. Someone in my building. She came by in person last week asking about estate planning, said she'd been referred. She was describing your situation in hypothetical terms, testing how much I might share. My assistant recognized her from the photo on your file and flagged it after the fact. She's been tracking my movements. It appears so. She also sent a formal letter to my office yesterday afternoon requesting documentation related to the Washington estate and any associated trust instruments, citing her interest as a potential heir through her husband. Harold's voice was measured, but I heard the edge underneath it. She is preparing to file a formal challenge. How long do we have before she moves? If she's writing letters, she's already retained someone. My estimate is 7 to 10 days before she files something. This was the moment in the plan where everything either accelerated on our terms or hers. I had prepared for it. Harold had prepared for it. The difference between us and Brittany in that moment was that we had been preparing for 6 weeks, and she was only now realizing she needed to prepare at all. "Monday is too late," I said. "Can we do Friday? I'll make it work." Harold. "Before Friday, I need one more meeting with Dot." I drove to Sweet Auburn on Thursday morning. Dot was already at her desk when I arrived, a second cup of coffee waiting on the corner for me. She is not a woman who wastes warmth on ceremony, which I have always appreciated. She gets directly to the point, which is what I needed that morning more than comfort. There's something on the drive I didn't show you the first time, she said, before I had fully sat down. Raymond asked me to wait until you'd had time to understand the full picture first. He didn't want you to make any decisions about this piece before you understood everything else. Show me now, I said. She opened a folder on her desk. Physical documents printed and organized in the way she organized everything, with the precision of someone who has built a career on knowing that paperwork does not lie if you know how to read it. In the last 2 years of his life, Raymond asked me to do something specific. He wanted me to monitor the capital structure around the business. Any unusual access attempts, any inquiries about ownership, any financial activity that touched the company in ways that didn't go through him. She slid the first page across the desk. In October of 2021, I found this. A personal loan agreement. $85,000. Darius Washington borrower. First Southern Community Bank lender. Collateral listed equity stake in Washington and Boyd Construction, LLC. I read it twice. The equity stake he listed as collateral, I said. It was never his to pledge. No, it wasn't. Dot set down a second document beside the first, a signature page. The loan required a co-signer with legal standing, someone who could represent that the collateral was valid. I looked at the signature. Brittany Holloway Washington, legal counsel and co-signatory. I put the page down. Outside Dot's window, Auburn Avenue was quiet in the morning light, the old buildings casting long shadows across the sidewalk. She knew, I said. She has a trust law specialty. There is no version of events in which she did not know that equity stake belonged to me, not Darius. She knew, Dot said plainly. Then she signed anyway. Yes. I was quiet for a moment, working through what this meant. Not the legal implications. Harold could map those, and they were significant. But the human architecture of it. She used it to tie him to her, I said. Dot nodded. Think about it from Darius's perspective. He signed a loan using collateral he didn't actually own. That's fraudulent misrepresentation to a lender. If that loan is called and audited, he's personally liable for $85,000 and potentially exposed to criminal fraud charges. He can't leave the marriage without the whole structure collapsing on top of him. Brittany holds the documentation. As long as they're together, she controls whether that story ever gets told. She built a trap, I said, and she built it around my son. That is my assessment, yes. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about Darius at my kitchen table 3 days ago, asking in his father's voice if he could come home for Sunday dinner. I thought about the recording. She just needs to sign. And I understood now that Brittany had applied that same logic to her own husband. You didn't need someone's will. You just needed their signature on the right document at the right moment, and after that, you had everything you needed. Darius isn't the architect of this, I said. It was not quite a question. I believe he's been a participant, Dot said carefully. But Brittany is the engineer. I stood and walked to the window. The morning light on Auburn Avenue. The history of this neighborhood sitting in every brick. A century of people who had been told they had no claim to what they had built, and who had found ways nonetheless to build it, and hold it, and pass it forward. Dot, I said when I go into that meeting on Friday, I need to be able to give Darius a way out. Not just Brittany a wall to walk into. What are you thinking? The loan. If I step forward as the trust owner, that loan becomes a problem the bank will identify immediately. But if I restructure it, formally through Harold, it becomes a legitimate debt in Darius's name backed by real collateral. He still owes it, but he owes it to me on a real payment schedule with nothing fraudulent in the paperwork. The trap Brittany built disappears. Dot looked at me for a long moment. You're going to pay off his leverage over your son. I'm going to remove it, I said. That's different. She nodded slowly. I'll prepare the documents for Harold." On Wednesday evening, 2 days before the Friday meeting, Loretta called. "Claudia, something happened. You need to know." She told me that a woman named Patricia Hendricks, a friend of Brittany's from the law firm's social circle, had run into Loretta at a grocery store that afternoon and had been asking with the careful casualness of someone who has been briefed on what to ask why Loretta had been seen near Buckhead several times recently. Loretta had said she was doing some shopping. Patricia had nodded pleasantly and moved on. I called Harold the moment Loretta hung up. "I know. She sent a second letter today more aggressive than the first. She is filing the challenge. My best guess is she will move on Monday." A pause. "Friday is now critical. We will not be moving it." "I didn't think you would." Another pause. "Claudia, I want to say something. I've been practicing estate law for 38 years. I've sat across from a lot of people in difficult family situations. What Raymond put together for you, the care he took, the foresight, I want you to know that in 38 years, I haven't seen anything quite like it." I looked out the kitchen window at the blueberry bush in the early dark, the fruit just visible on the branches. "He was a very thorough man," I said. "He was a man who loved his wife." After we hung up, I stood at the window for a while. The night was warm, the neighborhood quiet, the ordinary sounds of Decatur in the evening coming in from outside. A car passing someone's dog, a screen door closing somewhere down the street. I had lived in this house for 42 years. I had painted the bedroom twice and the kitchen 3 times. I had grown tomatoes in the backyard and lost them twice to a late frost, and grown them again the following year. I had watched Darius take his first steps on the living room floor and helped him with his homework at the kitchen table, and sat on the front porch the night he drove away to college and not cried until I was back inside. I had buried Raymond from this house. I had stood at his grave in the January cold and understood for the first time what it means to have a grief too large for words, and I had come home to these rooms and sat in them in the particular silence of a house that holds a different number of people than it did before. No one was moving me out of this house, not because of what any document said, because this was the place where my life had been lived, and I had every right to go on living it here. I was ready. "I've been ready," I said aloud to the empty kitchen since the night I opened that tin box. On Friday morning, I put on the gray suit Raymond always said made me look like I meant business. I called Loretta and asked her to drive me. I ate a good breakfast because my mother always said you think better on a full stomach, and I have never found reason to argue with her. Then I picked up my notebook, picked up my bag, and walked out of my house. To go finish what Raymond had started. Harold's conference room was on the 14th floor of a building in Buckhead, with a view of the Atlanta skyline that Raymond would have studied with the eye of a man who understood what went into making it stand. I arrived early and sat at the head of the table. To my left, Harold in his brown suit, a bound folder in front of him. To my right, Dot, her reading glasses already on her copy of the documentation open to the first page. Across from them at the far end of the table, Terence, his large hands resting quietly on the tabletop, his face giving away nothing. Darius was not there. I had made that a condition when we scheduled the meeting. I told Harold I don't want my son in the room when this happens. He needs to be able to make his own choices afterward without Brittany watching his face while he makes them. Brittany arrived 8 minutes late, which I took as a decision rather than an accident. She came with a man I did not recognize. Younger than Harold Darksuit, the alert posture of someone who bills by the hour and knows it. Her own attorney. She had prepared. She sat across from me and arranged her materials with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Her face was composed professional, giving nothing away. She looked exactly like what she was, a lawyer who had come to a meeting she expected to win. "Thank you all for being here," she said, glancing briefly at Harold and Dot before settling her gaze on the center of the table, rather than on me. A courtroom habit. Address the room, not the opponent. We've requested this meeting to discuss the Washington estate, and to formally notify you of our intent to challenge the 2019 trust instrument on grounds of Brittany. My voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. In a room that has gone completely still, even a quiet voice carries. She stopped. Before you continue, I said I'd like you to look at what's in front of you. Harold slid the bound folder across the table. Brittany's attorney reached for it first, which told me something. He opened it. For the next 4 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the hum of the building's ventilation system and the soft sound of pages turning. I watched his face. I have sat across from enough people in enough difficult conversations to know that a face in the act of reading tells the truth, even when a voice will not. I watched his expression move, from the confident readiness of a man expecting a routine dispute to the careful attention of a man reading something that required his full concentration, to the particular stillness of a man who has just understood that the case he thought he had taken is not the case in front of him. He leaned toward Brittany and spoke quietly into her ear. She looked at the folder for the first time. The documentation Harold had prepared was thorough and precise. 23 meeting records between Raymond and Harold across 5 years. Each one dated, initialed, annotated. The independent psychological evaluation from 2020. The blue notebook, 47 entries, Brittany's own questions recorded in Raymond's own hand with dates she could not dispute. The email inquiry she had sent to the Midtown firm in 2021, which she had perhaps assumed was untraceable. The transcript of the March 14th recording, and a note that the original audio was held in a secure location outside this building. And on the final page, the loan documents. $85,000. Darius Washington borrower. Equity collateral in Washington and Boyd Construction, LLC. Equity that had belonged to me since 2019. And at the bottom of the signature page in the line designated for legal counsel and co-signatory Brittany Holloway Washington Esquire. She looked up at me then. Really looked. Not the practiced, controlled gaze she had been deploying all morning, but something unguarded. Something that recognized for the first time what it actually meant to have been out-prepared. Items 5 and 6, I said, involved the same person. No one spoke. The recording establishes that you understood the trust's structure before Raymond died. The loan documents establish that you co-signed collateral you knew did not belong to Darius. I kept my voice even. Factual. The way Raymond used to describe a structural problem, not with drama, but with the clarity of someone who has measured it correctly. That is not a legal error. That is deliberate financial fraud. Harold spoke without inflection, which carries significantly more consequence than a disputed trust. Brittany's attorney put his hand on her arm. She did not move. "Let me tell you what I want," I said, "and I want you to hear this carefully, because I am going to say it once." The room was very still. I do not want to destroy my son's marriage. I do not want Darius to face criminal liability. And I do not want you to sit before a bar ethics committee. I paused. Those are the things I do not want. What I am asking for is this: you withdraw the trust challenge. You have no further contact with Harold Dott or Terrence regarding any asset in my estate. And you release the loan instrument you have been holding over my son. Brittany looked at me for a long time. I met her eyes and held them. "And if I don't," she said, "then Harold and Dot do exactly what the law requires them to do, and I stop making decisions about what I want." Her attorney leaned toward her again. She did not look at him. She was still looking at me, and what I saw in her face was not anger. It was the recognition of someone who had spent years being the most prepared person in every room she entered and had finally walked into a room where someone had been preparing longer. "We'll need time to confer," her attorney said. "Of course," Harold said. "Mrs. Washington is available for a response by end of business Friday." As Brittany gathered her materials to leave, I stood. "Brittany," she paused at the door. I had thought about what I wanted to say in this moment. I had written several versions of it in my notebook and crossed them all out. What I said in the end was the simplest version, the one that came from the place beyond strategy. I didn't do this to defeat you. I did this because Raymond spent his life building something, and I will not allow it to be taken apart. Not by strangers, and not by family. I held her gaze. If you love Darius the way you say you do, teach him what I should have taught him earlier, that a legacy is not something you inherit. It is something you earn the right to carry forward. She did not answer. She walked out. The door closed behind her. Darius came to the house that night without calling. He appeared on the porch at 8:30, holding 2 cups of coffee from the place on Commerce Drive that Raymond had gone to every Saturday morning for 15 years. He handed me one and sat down beside me on the porch swing. We sat in silence for a while, the way people do when the silence is not empty but full. She told me he said finally, "I know she would. I knew about the loan. He said it the way you say something you have been carrying. I knew what she was doing with it. I didn't know how to get out without. I know I said. That's why I did it the way I did." He turned to look at me. "Mom, the $85,000. You didn't have to." "Darius." I waited until he stopped. "Harold is restructuring the loan. It will be legal, fully collateralized in your name only. You will owe me $85,000 and you will pay it back on a real schedule, and when it's done, it's done. No more rope around your neck." I looked at him. "You also still owe $112,400 to the company, which is now mine, and we'll discuss that payment schedule separately." He let out a breath that sounded like something loosening after a long time held tight. "Why," he said, "after everything. Because you are my son. Because your father would have wanted it. And because—" I paused, finding the right words. "Because I am not interested in winning over you. I am interested in you being free enough to become who you should be." He nodded. His jaw was working. He looked out at the dark yard, at the blueberry bush, at the old porch swing chain that Raymond had oiled every spring. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "How did you know? How did you know to be ready for all of this?" I thought about the answer for a moment. "Because your father taught me," I said. "Not by protecting me from hard things. By making sure I had everything I needed to face them myself." We sat on that swing for another hour until the night got cool and the street lights were all the light there was. He drove home somewhere around 10. I watched his taillights disappear down the street, then sat alone a little longer, listening to the neighborhood settle into quiet. Brittany withdrew the trust challenge by Friday afternoon, 2 hours before the deadline. Darius began making payments on both debts the following month without being asked twice. What happened inside that marriage after the meeting, I do not know. I decided not to ask. That is Darius's life to live. Washington and Boyd Construction continues to operate under Terrence Boyd's management with quarterly reports to me and steady, reliable work. The blueberry bush Raymond planted produced its first real harvest. I made jam from it. More than I can eat alone, so I brought jars to Loretta and to Pastor Ellington and to Dot. The land in Gwinnett County is still mine, still waiting. Dot and I have been talking about what it could become. A small resource center for older women navigating financial independence. Not a charity, but a real operation. Financial counseling. Legal basics. The kind of practical knowledge my mother taught me at a kitchen table in Atlanta when I was 9 years old, available to women who never had a table like that to sit at. Raymond built structures. I intend to build the kind of foundation people can stand on. People sometimes ask what this story is really about. I always say the same thing. It is not about the money. The money was important. The documents were important. The legal structure Raymond built across 5 quiet years was important. But none of that is the heart of it. The heart of it is this. Raymond Washington spent decades paying attention. He watched and he recorded and he prepared. Not because he was afraid of his own family, but because he loved me enough to ensure that my future would never depend on anyone's goodwill but my own. He understood that the most dangerous position a person can be in is not poverty. It is dependence on someone who does not have your best interest at heart. He gave me something that no one could take away. Not a house, not a bank account, not a trust document. He gave me the knowledge of what I actually had and the time to understand it before anyone else could tell me otherwise. And what I learned from that, what I would say to any woman listening to this story, is simple enough to fit on an index card, which is exactly the form Raymond used when he wanted to say something important. Know what you have, know who holds it, and know that your name on a piece of paper is only the beginning of what it means to own something. Kindness is not the same as ignorance. Softness is not the same as weakness. And a woman who keeps a ledger, who asks questions, who reads what she signs, that woman is not a burden to be managed. She is exactly the person her husband believed she was all along. They thought she was just the wife who didn't know. They didn't know that the man she loved spent 42 years making sure she knew everything. She had learned well.